Hello and welcome to Beat Seeker. I'm Matt McButter.
And I'm Mike Weider.
Beat Seeker is a podcast that explores the changing world of music technology and discovery. In this episode, we cover music recommendation systems with Spotify's Paul Lamere. Paul is a senior engineering leader working on features such as Discover Weekly and Release Radar. He's a 4-time nominee and twice winner of the MTVO Music Award for Best Music Hack and the first inductee into the Music Hackers Hall of Fame.
We sit down with Paul to discuss the origin story of Spotify's Discover Weekly, how it works, and how you can improve your own recommendations. Finally, we covered the pitfalls of AI-based recommendation technologies and what Spotify is doing to address these issues. Paul, welcome to BeatSeeker.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Paul, I imagine many people don't know what a music hacker is. Can you explain what this means and how you got into music hacking?
Sure. So there's a lot of folks out there who are really passionate about music and technology. So the bunch of folks have over the years have organized things called music hack days, where these like-minded people get together and basically hack on technology and music. So it could be anything from building a new musical instrument or building a web app that lets you do something cool with making playlists, or things that help you find events, music events in your area, or that sort of thing. So over the years, I've been going to those, helping to organize them as well, and built lots of music hacks. And that's the kind of thing I like to do in my spare time as well. I'm always hacking on something.
Yeah, so some of your hacks are legendary in music hack, in the music hacker community. For example, Boil the Frog, Infinite Jukebox, Girl Talk in a Box, Bohemian Rhapsody, The Bonomizer. So by the way, I just wanted to say your music hack naming game is also very strong in addition to the hacks themselves. Boil the Frog, for example, I've played around with. It's so cool. Basically creates a smooth mix from sort of any artist to another. One I did this morning, just before talking to you, was making a mix from Metallica to Neil Young. And I just want to read out how that sort of played out. It was Metallica to Van Halen to Journey to Toto to Hall & Oates to Billy Joel to Paul McCartney to Dylan to Neil Young. I mean, that is so cool. And I just want to know, how do these hacks come about from your work in music recommendation or vice versa? Or is it something kind of completely independent from your work?
It's all fuzzy borders. I work for a music company that, and making music listening experiences is what I do for a living. But a lot of times there's just some itch that I want to scratch around some new idea. And the best way to do it is just to hack on it and put it out there in front of people.
So is there a hack that's given you, would you say, like the deepest insights into your work? Is there one that's maybe your favorite?
Yeah, it's like, who's your favorite child? I have a couple of different types of hacks. One are these sort of music exploration playlisting tools like Boil the Frog that will give you, this seamless playlist. Another type are these almost like music performance hacks, like Girl Talk in the Box, which basically lets you turn any song into a musical instrument. It breaks the song up into these tiny little quanta that you can play and rearrange and sequence and do all sorts of crazy things. So that was a real lot of fun, and I learned a lot about music. Unfortunately, the copyright gods have decided that it's not a good thing to have online anymore, so it's currently not online.
I remember something about the copyright gods also not being happy with Girl Talk, the artist in the first place. So,
So Paul, we'd love to know more about your work at Spotify, but maybe before we get into that, I understand that you came into Spotify through an acquisition of a company called EchoNest. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the EchoNest story and what they were doing and how that all came about.
Sure. Yeah. So the EchoNest is started by two MIT PhDs, Brian Whitman and Tristan Jahan. And they met at the MIT Media Lab, and they were both exploring music tech. And they were kind of like the chocolate and the peanut butter that combined together to make the Reese's peanut butter cup. Brian's work was all around trying to understand the cultural aura around music. So he had these big web crawlers that would go out and find everything about every artist and do a bunch of natural language processing and all that to give this kind of understanding of this cultural knowledge around an artist. So you could look at an artist and say, oh, this Britney Spears, she's a diva. She was in the 90s. She plays pop music. She's female. She's quirky. She's often a guilty pleasure. Those kind of things would be kind of what we'd learn about Britney Spears. On the other side was Tristan. He was exploring, trying to understand music by looking at the content of the music. So his tech was all around doing digital signal processing on the audio to extract out musical features like how danceable a song was or how energetic it was, what the tempo was, what the timbral characteristics of it. So these two sides of music, understanding the cultural aura around the music and understanding the content as well, gave this really solid, complete picture of music. And so the idea of the Echo Nest was to take those two core technologies and build a set of web services around this that we could then use to power all of the music services that were popping up in the late 2000s and early 2010s.
So was Echo Nest a music recommendation engine as a service in a way that was other streaming services would leverage to power their recommendation engines?
Exactly. So the APIs are pretty broad. They provided all sorts of metadata around songs and artists and albums, deep information about artists like bios and images and things like that. But the core tech were things like artist similarity. So given a particular artist, find me a bunch of similar artists, and then a pretty sophisticated playlisting engine that you could seed with tracks or artists or genres or any kind of arbitrary text and throw in some constraints and get back a playlist that would be suitable for listening. So there are all sorts of services, out at the time, like iHeartRadio, Clear Channel, RDO, that were all being powered by the Echo Nest. Now, one holdout was Spotify. Spotify wasn't an Echo Nest customer for the longest time because Spotify thought that music recommendation and discovery was a core competency that they needed to own, and farming it out didn't seem like the thing to do. So eventually they sort of realized, I think, that the Echo Nest was the best in class. And since they didn't want to farm it out, they just bought us. And so in 2014, the Echo Nest was acquired by Spotify, and we became a big part of their personalization portfolio.
That's great segue into Discover Weekly. Mike and I are both huge fans of Discover Weekly. I mean, a technology like that would have been considered magic in the 1980s. And in fact, if I had Discover Weekly in the 80s to myself when I was in high school, I would have easily been the coolest kid in high school because I would have been breaking all of this new music. So can you tell us a little bit about how the Discover Weekly project came together?
Sure. So it's a funny, back to hacking again. So Spotify has periodically these music hack days or hack weeks inside the company. And during these periods, folks can get to work on some of their passion projects. And this started off as a passion project by a few engineers to say, hey, let's build a playlist for everybody on Spotify that's oriented totally toward discovery and give it to them once a week. And the engineers built it. It tweaked all of the right buttons. And so the product folks said, hey, let's see if we can actually turn this into a product. And it launched and became a big part of the Spotify listening experience.
I think when people, first use Discover Weekly, it's either, this is magic, or a little bit of that feeling of like, oh, this is creepy. It knows me too well. One user tweeted at one point, Spotify's Discover Weekly knows me so well that if it proposed, I'd say yes. So how is the algorithm able to zone in so well on our tastes?
Well, yeah, so there's a lot of stuff going on in Discover Weekly. One of the things that Spotify has that no other or very few other music listening services have is we just have super, super deep data. So we have hundreds and hundreds of millions of people listening to Spotify every day. Those people are listening to sessions that they've programmed. They're putting songs into playlists. They're sharing music. They're saving music. So all of this kind of interaction gives us a sense of what music goes well together. So from all of this music listening behavior, we can start to get a sense for which items are similar, which items are dissimilar. And that becomes kind of the core of a recommendation algorithm. So if we say, all right, this Led Zeppelin song is very similar to this Lynyrd Skynyrd song, that maybe becomes raw data, raw material for a recommendation. So once we have this sort of black box where we can see tracks in and get similar tracks out, then we can build a discovery playlist around that by looking at the taste of a particular user. So there's all sorts of ways to do that, of course, but one way would be just to look at what you've been listening to recently and maybe cluster that to say, oh, this person is listening to some show tunes and some heavy metal. So maybe we'll try to cluster those up and take those heavy metal tracks, push them into the black box, get a bunch of those similar tracks coming out. Then you have to do some filtering on those because you don't want to recommend tracks that the person has already listened to. There may be some tracks that are not recommendable for reasons like, licensing reasons like the region, or they may be in a language that the user doesn't usually listen to, that sort of thing. And then once you've got a bunch of candidates, then you tend to sequence them. Perhaps you want a coherent listening experience, so you'll try to cluster things that sound together the same. You may want to put your best recommendations at the top, that sort of thing. So all of that kind of fits together to build this set. Now, Discover Weekly is an interesting set because it's primarily not built for listening. Like most people with Discovery Weekly, they don't just sit down and listen to it from start to finish. They're more likely to browse through it and pick and choose because, a set that's entirely filled with recommendations is likely to have a lot of things that you just don't want. We didn't get right. So you may not want to listen all the way through.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I find in my case, I go through and I cherry pick 2 or 3 songs. And I might just listen. Sometimes I'll just listen to the first, 10 seconds, or I might kind of skip listen through it and be like, yeah, that's something I want to, add to a playlist, or, oh my God, that's amazing. Or I might just reject it, altogether. So I would find very few songs that are, way out of my taste, but I'm probably going to keep 5 to 10% or, 2 or 3 songs, something like that. So how do you think my experience compares to others, and how do you measure accuracy and use that maybe as a feedback loop?
Yeah. So I think your approach to using Discovery is very common. And for a set like Discover Weekly, the type of metrics that we'll tend to use are the things that you were talking about, like how much engagement did the user have with the set? Do they come back to the set every week? One of the things that we look at is we call a meaningful connection. Did a user tend to have a connection with a track or an artist that was on Discover Weekly? And we can measure that by seeing if you put a track onto one of your own playlists, or you shared it with somebody, or you looked at the artist bio page or something like that. And then there's some of the broader metrics that we can look at are things like, do people who listen to Discover Weekly often switch from being a free user to a premium user? How long do they stay on platform, or do they unsubscribe? Did we hurt their musical tastes, sensibility so much that they moved on to another service? So all of those things go into the mix. Now, the things like, do people move from free to premium, or do they leave the service? Those are those kind of metrics are pretty hard to budge. We just have so many users that any tweaks to a set that you do on a weekly basis to try to improve things, you won't see impact at that level. But things like engagement, meaningful connections, those types of things are pretty good metrics.
Coming up after the break, some thoughts from Paul on how to improve your Discover Weekly, the pervasiveness of Spotify's recommender systems in your Spotify experience, and how algorithms can affect new artists.
Our episode today is brought to you by Boombox. Boombox is a game where you play in music leagues with your friends and face off in friendly song selection competitions. Matt, we've been playing Boombox with our friends for a little bit. Can you explain how this thing works?
Sure. Yeah. We play a new theme each week, say best old school hip hop, most danceable, or best cover song. Everyone then goes and finds a song that best matches that theme, submits it anonymously, and then we vote on the best submissions.
Themes themselves have been pretty entertaining.
Yeah, you mean like best song to trash a hotel room to, or best song to blast at full volume on the highway with your windows down? Coming up with themes is part of the fun.
And how have you been doing? What's your strategy for picking songs?
I've been doing okay. I even tied for first once. Usually I look for something obscure but deadly that I hope will blow a few minds.
If you want to learn more, go to boomboxsoftware.com or search for Boombox Music League on the Apple App Store.
And we're back.
So, Paul, if some of the listeners wanted to improve their Discover Weekly, do you have any sort of tips or thoughts about that? As I understand it, there are positive and negative signals that most algorithms have. So,
Yeah. So there's a whole tricky business out there around, in particular, functional music. So people will listen to music not necessarily because they want to actually listen to the music in a lean forward way. So it may be that you're putting on sleep music or your music for your kids, or it's Christmas time and you're listening a lot of Christmas music, but that's not what you normally listen to. So we do a lot of work to try not to include functional music in your listening, but sometimes it's hard to tell what is functional music versus non-functional music. So somebody's ambient music that they only play in the background when they're working, maybe somebody else's experimental ambient that they really are really like to listen to in a lean forward way. In general, if you think that some of your listening might be misinterpreted as music we think that you're listening to, then turn on your private listening session in your app, and that stuff won't make it into your tastes.
Before I had the family plan, and we were listening on sort of one main computer in our living room, and it was just the family one. My one daughter, who's really into K-pop, kept totally messing with my algorithm, right? Like all of my recommendations were coming up all this K-pop stuff. So, it was good to move to the family plan, obviously, so that I wouldn't get skewed by family members where, when I didn't want to be. So can you tell us what the impact to users of music recommendation has been? Like, do you have a way of measuring that? How significant these algorithms are in driving discovery as a percentage of your overall usage?
Yeah, so I can't give you any raw numbers. I think recommendation is extremely important. In fact, just about everything that you see in the app when you open Spotify is put in front of you because of a recommender behind the scenes. So if you go to the homepage, the shelves that you see there, the hubs, they'll all be picked for you based on your interaction with the system. Many of the sets, even sets that you may think of as being pure editorial sets, may be personalized for you. So if you go to listen to a set like All Out 70s, behind the scenes, there may be a pool of a much larger set of songs that you see in the playlist, and then those songs may be ranked specifically for you. So recommendations are pervasive. And one stat, this is from Amazon back in when they first launched their book recommender in 1995, they saw their sales go up almost 40%. Just by replacing the popular charts with a personalized recommender. So it could be a sense of how important it is.
Innovations like Discover Weekly are a huge hit for consumers. Can you talk about the impact to artists? New artists have always needed a way to be, broken to the public and gain popularity, like by a radio DJ traditionally, the so-called cold start of a new artist. So are algorithms able to help new artists?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of work that we're doing at Spotify to expand the reach into beyond the top tiers of artists to the newer artists. Algorithms are actually pretty good at saying, balancing these objectives. Like, I want a playlist that's of high relevance to a user, and I want to make sure that we include music from all tiers of artists, for instance. So we can sort of set the dials to try to get more fans to artists. We can also, we have a whole artist, like, this is one of those places where we have listeners and we have artists, this sort of two-sided marketplace where we also have these artist portals, and we can help artists point them at where their fans are being, we're seeing more engagement with their fans, which songs or which playlists people are finding their tracks to. So artists can get a sense for how people are discovering their music and adapt to that.
So Paul, I'm sure you've heard some critics out there that aren't maybe as enthusiastic about the rise of algorithms and are maybe lamenting that influence. You probably heard a few of these complaints, but there was one New York Times critic, for example, who said, music is mysterious, and I don't want robots completely in control of my discovery. Jimmy Iovine, famous music producer, said algorithms alone can't do this emotional task. You need the human touch. So, how do you respond to critics who kind of lament the rise of algorithms and sort of harken back to the days of the DJ and the human in the mix?
Yeah, I totally agree that there's nothing better than having an expert music curator sitting next to you and helping you pick the next songs. But we don't have that. So the DJ was great for picking music, but their goal was to pick music for millions of people because their radio stations had millions of listeners. Now, with the way streaming services work, we can personalize and give a listening experience designed for a particular user. So I think we're sort of trading off having a music expert at your side, which you never really did have unless you were Jimmy Iovine, or you get personalized recommendations based on all of the things that we think we know about you when you're listening.
Is it, it is also maybe in some ways the Spotify method has a little bit of the human touch built into your algorithm, in the sense that you are taking advantage of the billions of playlists that other people have created, which are human curation, to help customize the playlist for individuals.
Yeah. So, of course, all of our recommendations are based on how people interact with music, as well as what the music sounds like and what people are talking about. We also have a pretty large team of music curators on staff, and they do a lot of work building our editorial playlists, but they also work on the personalized product as well to help us to get more of that music knowledge, music curation into our personalized sets. It's a big part of what we do. It's, it seems like in the 2010s, every music panel had a humans versus machines thing. And, at the end of the day, it's everything we build is a hybrid. There's always humans in the loop whenever we're rolling out a set, a new type of personalized set. We work hard with music editors at the front end, and then during the whole evaluation and rollout to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're sensitive to the music sensibilities of our users.
Yeah, I guess maybe one other critique that I've read about is really people suggesting that algorithms can be somewhat of an echo chamber, in that they tend to reinforce what you already like and are not necessarily giving new diversity in discovering brand new things. Some have even have a name for this, they call it algorithm culture. How do you grapple with that? Because I guess people do like to hear the things they like and the artists that they really listen to. So how do you handle the issue of diversity and similarity?
Yeah, so it's a really broad topic. We do all sorts of A/B tests where we'll tweak a set. We'll see how users react to it. And one of the things we learn over and over and over again, if you add familiar music to a set people listen to it more. And yeah, so people like familiar music. So trying to push people into new areas of listening is super important, but it's super tricky. You have to try to find this right mix of familiarity and variety. Now, in terms of this filter bubble echo chamber stuff, it's certainly super easy for recommenders to basically recommend the same thing over and over again and not give a user a chance to get out of that. But I think a lot of that is dealt with just by having a little bit more care in the algorithms, and algorithms can look and say, hey, we are actually not recommending a very diverse set of artists for this set of users, and then tweak the knobs to say, well, let's push users into either into the longer tail or into artists that are at the fuzzier edges of the cluster.
Right. And so are you looking at that from an individual standpoint? Like if you could see that, okay, well, Mike responds well to diversity, whereas Matt only likes similarity. So I'm going to give him more similarity and Mike more diversity, or is that more of a generic thing across the board for everybody?
We do it at all levels. We'll certainly look at users and try to get an understanding of what we call their tilt, how lean in or lean back they are in terms of listening. And people's tilt changes all even over the course of a day. Someone may be a lean in user in the evening when they're exploring for music, but when they're driving, they're lean back. But yeah, we also look across different cohorts of users, get an understanding of how they're listening. When we have a set like Discover Weekly that's delivered to hundreds of millions of people, we'll look at the cross-section of artists that are being delivered and look at all sorts of statistics around gender balance and things like that to get a sense for what's being recommended and if there's any systematic issues that we think we might want to address. It's tricky because as soon as you start turning the knobs, you're affecting the listening of lots of people, and if you mess it up,
right, yeah. So you have to do that very carefully. Well, you brought up the issue of gender bias. I did read some articles about this, that there's a suggestion that some of these algorithms are biased towards men. And how would you respond to that? And have you guys investigated that? Is there any truth to that allegation? There's even, I think, a change.org petition of 30,000 people who had signed up for either Spotify or some other streaming service to investigate this.
One of the things that really kicked this off was a country music singer, Martina McBride, I think. Anyway, she's a famous country music singer. She went to start creating a playlist on Spotify called Country Music, I believe. And Spotify will give you recommendations right away, even just based on the title of the music. And she noticed that none of the artists in her first 3 or 4 pages of recommendations were by female artists. And so she tweeted about that and wrote some articles about that. And the problem, of course, is that Spotify drives that feature based on, how people are organizing their music. They're making playlists with country music. And it seems like a lot of those playlists are filled with music by men. So we sort of held a mirror up to country music listening and showed it to McBride, and naturally it wasn't a very good good reflection. So we took in what she said and we made some changes to that algorithm so that now if you make a country music playlist, you'll see more balanced gender representation there. But it's a tricky problem because music listening, when we're looking at how hundreds of millions of people are listening to music, the natural biases that are in there that have been built up over generations, whether it's fair or not,
you're just tapping into that in a way, right? That reflecting it back on people.
Right. So, but we have a whole group inside Spotify that deals with algorithmic fairness, and so they're always looking at these kind of issues, trying to figure out what's the best way we can do. And it's a pretty active area in the sort of research academic community as well around recommender systems to how to deal with these sorts of issues. Of course, if it's in Spotify, it's a lot easier than the folks at Google News or Facebook who are dealing with politics as opposed to music.
That really speaks to the evolution of recommendation systems. So wondering if you could, gaze into your crystal ball a little bit and tell us where you think this is headed. If we were to fast forward, say, to 2025, what do you think music discovery will look like?
Yeah. So, when Spotify first started out back in the 2007, 2008, it was essentially just a big search box in front of millions and millions of songs. And that was fine back then because all of the people who were using Spotify were the hardcore music fans, right? They already spent all their time scouring for music, reading music blogs and music review sites. And so they go and search for their favorite songs and make a playlist. But over time, the audience of Spotify has grown much more toward the casual music listener. So maybe 10 years ago, we had very enthusiastic music fans, but now we're starting to get through to listeners who are rather indifferent about music. The only time they traditionally listen to music is when they get in the car and the radio happens to be on and they're listening to that music. So those types of folks, obviously the search box on 100 million songs is not going to work for them because they don't know what they want to listen to. So having a system that understands what you want to listen to when whatever you're doing is sort of the holy grail here. So something that understands your context. You're driving, you're working out, you're tired, you're on your way to a first date with somebody, all those things. And of course, there's a creepy line here, but getting a total understanding of what you're doing. Well, maybe that's way beyond the creepy line. Getting enough information about what you're doing so that we can have a playlist always running for you that adapts to you during the day, no matter what you're doing. Also, part of that is, I think there's still a lot to be learned from good old terrestrial radio, which had this really nice mix of music and talk content, whether it was local news and weather or just somebody talking in the background who feels like a pseudo friend. I think that kind of listening experience is still pretty important, and I think we'll probably see more of that coming in the future as people shift from being just music listeners to these kind of mixed media streams.
So, speaking of sort of creepy lines in the future, what do you think about AI generated music? I know that, I saw some of your hacks are even, generating music or derivative music. And can you envision, sometime in the future where Spotify or services like Spotify are actually generating music using AI for listeners?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of researchers who work for Spotify out in Paris's research lab in Paris. It was formerly the Sony's research lab, and they have actually put out an album of all algorithmically generated music. So yeah, I think there's a lot of folks who are looking at this sort of thing. I'm mildly skeptical. There's a whole bunch of music out there, especially this functional music. You want some background piano that's playing. There's enough Chopin probably to keep you busy, but maybe an algorithmically generated Chopin-like playlist would be interesting.
A modern player piano.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's a few steps before we get to completely AI generated music. I think algorithmic assisted music is it's on its way. So, give me a 4/4 drum with a good break. Give me a walking bass line. That's your input, and you get some music going, and then you can doodle around on your guitar to play the front ends or whatever.
So, Paul, we wanted to ask you for our guests, how do you discover music? What are some tips and tricks that you could give to people? What are the tools that the expert uses to find new tracks?
Yeah. So before COVID, we'd go into the office. We have an office-wide playlist manager, and we played music through the office speakers that everyone can hear. So if you needed to opt out, you'd put on headphones. But that was a great way to recognize music. So the social side of things, everyone pushing.
So you have your own office DJ, effectively, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Everyone pushes music into the queue, and there's Yeah, and people can thumb up and thumbs down, and they can play air horns and all sorts of crazy stuff. So that was a big part of it. Nowadays, most of the time I'm building recommendation algorithms, so I'm just bumping into music that way. I remember I was building a music recommendation feature, was testing it on a cohort of Mexican users to see how well it works in that particular region. And all this banda music came up, and it turned out I really liked it. And I don't know if you've ever listened to banda, but it has this amazing brass sections, and it's really good. So yeah, I'm always just bumping into music when I'm doing my work.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. This has been a great episode. We really enjoyed the conversation.
You bet. It was fun.
To learn more about Paul's work, you can find him on Twitter at @Lamere or on his blog at musicmachinery.com. You've been listening to Beat Seeker with your hosts Matt McButter and Mike Wider. If you like what you've been hearing, please like, subscribe, and share this podcast. If you really like it and want more, you'll find bonus content and exclusives on our Patreon. Visit beatseeker.fm, that's BEAT Seeker.fm, and on social media at BeatSeekerPod. And giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts helps too. This program was recorded at the Devil Lake Studios and the Tunnel Under Arundel. The program is produced by Matt McButter, Mike Wider, and Kate McCartney. Thanks for tuning in, and keep seeking.